Hello, my name is Mina. I'm a psychologist, and today I'm interviewing my mentor, Dr. Avi Goren-Bar, who is a clinical psychologist and art therapist with more than 40 years of professional experience. He came today to Belgrade from Tel Aviv, Israel. And the reason why we are filming this video is to spread the word about the annual conference of Expressive Arts Therapy, which will be held in Belgrade in October this year. So we would like to invite you to visit website www.meetingpointart.com and to read about the conference and maybe join us in Belgrade in October. The topic of the conference is Meeting Point, and we will talk about it more briefly during the interview. Now, Avi, welcome, and please, can you tell us something more about your professional background?
Wow, it's actually a life story because I started as a music therapist and as educational psychologist working with children and families. That was back in the previous century, in the 1980s. And thereafter, I found my creativity as a very essential tool in my psychotherapeutic activities. So I turned into an expressive therapist, and I was teaching for 20 years at the Leslie College Extension in Tel Aviv, which is a school for a master's in expressive therapy. Thereafter, in the 90s, I wrote my PhD dissertation about 3 self-psychologists applied to expressive therapy, and that was a big chapter in my life where I started 5 programs of expressive therapy, first in Athens, then it went to Istanbul, then it arrived to Zagreb, extended to Ljubljana, then to Belgrade, and we have by now a big community of expressive therapists. And lately, during the pandemic of the corona, I came up with a brilliant idea about Jungian coaching, where I took the Jungian psychology and applied it into the coaching profession. And now we have 4 domestic schools and 1 international online school. And my life, my personal life is interwoven in this professional life, which gives me a lot of satisfaction, curiosity, and mostly I meet people from all over the world, and it's very gratifying.
Okay, and about this expressive arts therapy method, can you explain a bit more how is it functioning? What happens to a person's psyche while the one is engaging in this expressive arts experience?
You see, one of the human basic experience when a human being is born is that the language develops only after the first year of our lives, and nevertheless we do communicate as babies with our parents through what we can identify as expressivity and expressive therapy or expressive mode, because when we kinesthetically calm down the baby, when we stimulate the baby with visuals, when we sing to the baby, we communicate emotionally with the baby infant through expressive arts. So the cradle of expressive therapy or expressive practicing dwells in the first year that we call pre-verbal communication. This is the essence of expressive therapy. There is another source of expressive therapy that during the Middle Ages, in the main square of the little towns, there used to be an activity like where Shakespeare later started his theater, which is a street theater where people can really could express their frustration, anger, criticism on the regime, on the culture, on private issues up on stage. So actually expressive therapy is enabling the client to have a stage with compassion, with expressive stimuluses to express human feelings, human conflicts within a sublimation format that turns suffering or stress or trauma into a reframed aesthetic experience that actually empowers people.
Okay, I wanted to ask you about sublimation and trauma later, but now that you mentioned it, maybe you can tell us a bit more about this, how expressive arts therapy, maybe not just as individual psychotherapy, but maybe as community activities or some workshops or education, help with healing the trauma, and how this mechanism of sublimation actually happens.
I thank you for such a profound question, because it leads us to really the essence of why I promote and believe in expressive therapy. Let's first analyze what happens to a human being when the person is traumatized. And actually, and unfortunately, we are exposed on a daily basis on trauma. If we look at the last 4 years, the trauma of the corona pandemic, the trauma of the Ukraine war, the trauma of the economic depression, the trauma of fascist regimes and so on, people on individual base are traumatized, not to speak about personal trauma. So in trauma, there are two mechanisms that deteriorate the personality, and it is a result of fight and flight. When there is a trauma, the first instinct is flight, get away from the trauma in order to survive. And in this getaway process, two things occur. One, a collapse of the mechanism of defense, and a regression into a repression and denial of what happens. Like, I'm there, but part of me is moving out, shifts out, splits into a mode that only partial of my personality is involved, and another part of the personality shifts out from the situation. This is one characteristic of the trauma. The second one is physiological response, like a blackout, like a depression, like an anxiety attacks, events that are totally connected to physiological mechanisms that are again in the service of the flight, because it's almost in a traumatic state, impossible to fight the trauma. The traumatic, post-traumatic syndrome is a synonym for a victim. And when you're a victim, you are in a submissive format. Expressive therapy is a mode where we can regain the clients, the traumatized client, into, first of all, becoming active. By drawing the trauma, by moving the trauma, by bringing out the voice of the trauma, we first of all activate the human psyche again in a very protected framework. Sublimation comes into the picture when raw, traumatic, here and now experiences are diverged into a distant perspective, aesthetic form. When I say aesthetic, not necessarily pleasant, but aesthetics in the sense that it is reorganized in a plastically or movemental or voice mode, so that the client can regain control on the trauma. So all you have to do, if we simplify the formula, is you expose yourself to the traumatized person with tools to be able to express the trauma from a distance. And here I have to mention our creation axis model, where the client, the traumatized person, is in contact with the material, organizes himself, starts improvising, arrives to the main theme that is the trauma, and by doing variation and elaboration on the theme of the trauma within the expressive tools, gets a new perspective, or in short, does a reframing to the trauma, and this is the beginning of the cure. The other aspect of your question has to do with community. Expressive arts is a language that is easily can be granted to a community. Community, when I say, is community of refugees, community of victims of trauma. For example, just recently, in a one night, 45 to 60,000 people died in south of Turkey because of an earthquake. People lost their lives, their families, and their properties. And they were gathered in community centers. They were gathered in hotel lobbies. And you can imagine the trauma, the tumult, the noise, and the desperation. And when you open up a small corner with expressive art tools, people get to communicate anew and to find common language that is not necessarily verbal, because words cannot pronounce the trauma, but movement, music, and especially plastically art can sublimate the trauma and create a common culture of arts that can become a common compassion and maybe remorse to the traumatized people on a community level.
Yes, I understand. So it's actually giving people new language that they can use to share their experience even when they're not able to talk about it.
Absolutely. And when you say about new language, as a new language, it requires time to learn the expressive arts, culture, techniques, but this is in itself therapeutic, because when you acquire the skill, when you are playful and exploring the power of the art materials, when you are exploring the space, when you are shrunk and you have to expand anew, the beginning of the learning of the language of the expressive therapy is the healing process in itself.
And now we can talk a bit about the meeting point as the topic of the conference, because we can kind of have introduction for it, because this offering language and space for sharing experiences actually creating a meeting point. Can you tell us something from your professional point of view about the concept itself, and why is it chosen to be the main theme of the conference?
First of all, I want to congratulate the Belgrade Expressive Art team for initiating this conference, because we are reuniting after 3 years of Corona pandemic. We used to have this tradition on an annual basis in every capital city of the 5 countries that combine this wonderful community. And I think it is, I know that it is one of the local team's idea to call this conference meeting point. And there are several reasons for that. First of all, we are going to get together again after the pandemic, so Belgrade is a meeting point for us. Second of all, I wasn't aware of that at all, but the Sava River and the Danube River come together in Belgrade, so this is really geographically, symbolically, a very nice idea. But from a psychodynamic point of view, meeting point is a contradictory concept, because you can have a meeting point between yourself and the external environment, somebody to interact with. So this is a meeting point between yourself and a significant other. Nevertheless, when we go into processes, deep processes of expressive therapy, then you have a meeting point between the ego, the functioning person, and the self, which is the authenticity of the person that lies down there in the depths of one's soul. Now, why is it so difficult to have a meeting point for oneself? Why is it so challenging for a person to authentically meet yourself? That's because we raise our children in culture that usually inhibits and suppresses the authenticity of meeting yourself. Very known is the book from the 70s by Alice Miller, The Drama of the Gifted Child, when she tells us about this inevitable process that the parent denies the child from getting in contact with, in a meeting point with your true self. And this is because of culture, because of education, because of monotheism, because of many external reasons, that once a human being is raised up, it's very sad to say, but most people are in exile from their own authenticity. Winnicott spoke about this true self and false self. So in expressive therapy, we encourage the person to dive into the authentic self, and this can be coined as a meeting point. I'm looking forward for this conference because people come up with great ideas about how to get in touch on a meeting point with others and the meeting point with oneself.
And now you gave me actually introduction to my next question. When I mention expressive arts therapy, the first impression people get is that it has something to do with inhibition of creativity. It has to do with art, not necessarily, but we can talk a little bit about it, how if we have inhibitions in creativity and expression, what happens to us and what happens when we start expressing freely.
My association that came up while listening to your question is a child that is approaching a piano with no teacher. So you have those white clips and there is the black hammers, and once you start exploring, you go step by step, and it's about trial and error, and it's about playfulness, and it's about letting go, and the key word I think is improvisation. Human beings are born creative, but because of inhibitions, we accumulate all our talents to provide to our significant others, our parents, our teachers, what they expect from us. And we neglect our authenticity. We are all by nature creative. So we have to approximate the client slowly to the language of exploration, trial and error, enjoying the mistakes, not seeing a fault or a dysfunctioning as a mistake, but dysfunctioning as playfulness to explore more and find your own way. In this sense, expressive therapy is about acquiring a language. And when you acquire a language, it needs to be with an emphasis on the process and to divide the process into fragments. So when I'm asked about expressive therapy, can a human being walk? Can a human being produce a voice? Can a human being make a scribble? Then this is the beginning of expressive therapy. The gap or the frustration starts when there is expectation. When you eliminate the expectation and you stay with merely the experience, then it's joyful, and it's about gradual learning and acquiring the language of freedom.
Yes, I'm very excited now about what you just said, because now I see expressive arts as something which is like the cure for the narcissistic society that we live in, where, you know, it's very
Absolutely.
important to be successful, to be perfect. And this is completely the opposite. Like, we are actually messy humans. We are imperfect. We make trials and errors, and that is the way we should live our life. And if we try to be perfect, then creativity is definitely suppressed.
You know that in the psychoanalytic literature, there is a psychoanalyst, Ogden, that spoke about the primitive edge of experience. And this concept of the primitive edge of experience relates to the beginning of our lives when we communicate, as I had explained to you, through our senses, through the smell, through the skin. This is why, for example, sexual relationship is a regression into the primal beginning of our development, where we communicate through the skin, through the smell, through the moisture, through the voices. And this is very curing. Expressive therapy invites our clients, our participants, to become who they are without the inhibitions and the narcissistic need to be brilliant, to be impressed, and to be successful. It's just be who you are, and with this you grow.
Yeah, and that is where the joy is, actually.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is what we get from people that participate in our workshops. You see that yesterday we had a promo workshop here in Belgrade, and you see when you end the workshop, people have special light. And what is this light? The rediscovery of the innocent, the little child within them. One of the guys said, you know, I never touched these materials since elementary school. And now he's, you know, a mature person. So getting back to the basic is what it is all about.
Yes. And how about your life experience? I would like also to hear how using this method shaped your way of thinking, approaching reality, perceiving reality, reacting to it.
I like personal challenging questions because if we speak about authenticity, I feel that I am a servant in delivering this message. So I will tell you something very personal. Since I divorced almost 20 years ago, I've had relationships, serious relationships in 20 years, but mostly I live alone. And I do magnificent quest being a loner. I live in many countries, I teach in many countries, I live in 2 places in Israel. And the question is, what keeps me so vital, courageous, productive, and happy most of my time? And the reason is that I think my life is an ongoing quest of expressive therapy in the sense that I do expressivity with myself, not only in creating art artifacts, but also at looking at life as an expressive arts experience, meeting people, interacting, expressing my feelings directly with no manipulation, being honest, taking in landscapes, weather, food, traditions. I'm very curious all the time. In every country that I start teaching, I read novels, I read about leaders. I want to know the people. And the expressive therapy for me is a way of living, exploring life, not being afraid, although you know it might sound that it's a story of a glorious success. No, I have my crashes. I live sometimes in the belly of the whale, but even there, when I'm very lonely or very desperate, it will always come out with a creative expressivity that really fascinates myself as well.
So it's not just psychotherapy. Expressive arts is a way of life.
No, you see, I'm 70 now and I've been working as a psychotherapist for 40 years, and surprisingly, and I'm very proud of that in the last 6-7 years I do mostly coaching. And for coaching, when you get away from the know-how, from the agenda, from the diagnosis, when you are coaching, you are on a symmetrical level with your client, and I feel that it's about curiosity. With all my knowledge, it's so wonderful, refreshing, and actually I become young when I simply show curiosity. And I think this is also in common with expressive therapy. You don't come with a know-how, you don't need to be a psychologist to bring close the expressive arts to a human being.
The difference between art therapy and expressive arts therapy is in how many modalities we use.
Yes.
And so the specialty of expressive arts therapy is intermodality. Usually we operate in one modality, for example, we paint or we dance, but this is something new, changing modalities, moving from one modality to the other. So what happens when we make this movement from...
So there are 2 questions in your question. One is the differential between expressive art therapy and art therapy or music therapy or movement therapy or drama therapy. And the other one is what happens with the intermodality and how to shift.
What happens with the person
when
while
one shifts
it's
from
shifting.
one modality to the other. So the first aspect of your question, it's purely politics. You see, this is a guild. This is sections that are artificial. As I explained, we are born with what we call, Daniel Stern calls it, a modal perception. The baby is able somehow in his brain to shift a message that comes from visual and turn it into vocal, or to hear vocal or see images, or to become in a kinesthetic movement and bring out voices. So there is a normal biological intermodality within the human perception. To remember this is basic. We are built in intermodality ability, which is called amodal perception. Now, putting this into sects like art therapy, movement therapy is ridiculous in the sense that if you see an artist painting, you will see that he or she is moving. and there is a lot of movement in producing the art. And vice versa, if you see a dancer dancing and you say close your eyes, there will be images coming up. So this classification is political. Now, why do we apply intermodal expressive arts in our therapeutic or in our educational processes? Because every modality has its own potential to grant the human being a different flavor of experience. When we are observing a visual or we produce a visual, we are cognitive because it has to be organized. When we are in movement, we are in spontaneity and we surrender to instincts because it's the muscles and the breathing system that is moving us. When we produce music, we produce it through a third dimension, which can be the drum or the keyboard or the strings, and then we act on something else. So every modality has its own characteristics, and every characteristics bequeaths a different psychological impact. So why not join? It's like a fruit salad. Why to do it only with watermelon? Put some oranges, put some raisins, put some banana, and you can explore the whole range of the fruit capacity. This is the analogy.
Okay, so it's actually natural for us.
Very natural, and you have to onset one mechanism while the other is acting. For example, I see a person, yesterday in the workshop it happened that she explained what she did in art, but I saw that her body is moving already. And there was there a circle, a golden yellow circle with arrows coming out. And when she explained it, you saw that she is already moving, and all I had to do is invite her to dance the art, put some music, and eventually she had new insights about expansion, for example.
Okay. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for coming with such wonderful questions that really enabled me to interface the expressive therapy to the audience. And come to our conference, you will never regret it. It's a gift to life, really.
Yes, I'm really looking forward to this conference. And everybody is welcome, considering there is no need for you to be from a mental health profession or artistic profession. But if you are, we also invite you to share something on the conference, to offer like a lecture, a workshop, exhibition, performance, and to be part of the conference as presenter. So visit the website and join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mina Milkovic, for inviting me over. It's been a pleasure to be here once again.